And we are live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our October listening club. We actually listened to a live album this time, which is an interesting choice, and I will explain it, I guess, a little bit later on. But before we start, I do want to go over some just general housekeeping rules. I say rules, there are no rules here. This is complete anarchy. But we do have some information. So this is our listening club. We have another monthly club. That's our movie club. We'll actually be having that discussion next Wednesday, the 30th. We watched Nosferatu, the Vampire, which ties into our quarterly book club, which is also meeting on the 1st. So that's going to be this coming Friday, a week from now, I think. Don't fact check me on that. It is on the 1st. And we read Dracula, which, ties in great with Nosferatu. I'm sorry that we don't have a vampire-themed music album that we listen to.
There's a Queens of the Stone Age. Oh, it's just a song. If I Were a Vampire.
Yeah. I feel like, I don't know, maybe we should have done Vampire Weekend or something. I don't know.
Oh, the band. There you go. Even better.
But we didn't do that. Hindsight is 2020. So these are all of the multimedia clubs that we have at the Dragonfly Arts Collective. We are a Facebook group, and we don't just do these multimedia clubs. It's just a general community. So there's a board where you can post your things or ask questions. We also have weekly meetings on Saturday mornings that we call Coffee and Creatives, where we get together and discuss some of the issues that arise from having creative careers and being a creative in general. We also do things like feedback calls, and we have live meetups in the Los Angeles area. So you can find out information on that and anything else that's going on with us on the Facebook group. And if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, we also have a Patreon. Right now, we don't have any extra perks or anything along those lines. Everything that we do is free and open to the public, or really open to the Facebook group. You do have to answer a couple of questions. You can't just join it all willy-nilly. But you can support us for as little as $2 a month. And those funds go directly into the group and supporting everything that we do, and specifically our live meetups. So definitely join us on the Facebook group and see what else we have to offer. For these clubs, we don't have a lot of people that we can bring onto the clubs just for management purposes. But we do leave them up for a while. So if you are watching this on the replay and you comment on it, we still get notifications. And I started these clubs because I like talking about media. So if you want to talk to me about Nirvana, please do. Or any of our past picks, which you can find on the Facebook group. I think that's it. I've been doing this for over a year. You'd think that I'd know by now. That being said, we will have a few more people joining us a little bit later on. They're just running a little bit behind. But I'm going to go ahead and get started by talking about our pick, which was Nirvana MTV Unplugged in New York, which is an interesting pick considering Nirvana is such a big deal. And I'm like, let's do a live album that's kind of a mix of their songs as well as like a bunch of covers.
Yeah, it's a really good live album.
It's a really good live album. I also think it's interesting to I don't know, Nirvana has such a vibe, especially with their albums, but I think listening to them acoustically really shows their songwriting skills, and just specifically their bass lines are always really impressive. And I feel like they kind of get lost in the mix a little bit when you're listening to the albums. I also think that this album is hilarious because if you watch it, because it is a video, it was done for a actual television series, MTV Unplugged. Um, Dave Grohl is just trying so hard not to play the drums hard. Like you can just see it in his face and like how he's holding, like he's trying so hard to play softly.
Well, I think they all are. I don't think they had an acoustic moment in their life before this, except that one track on Nevermind that sounds acoustic, and it's on this album. But yeah, I read that Kurt was terrified of playing acoustic, probably not because he couldn't play acoustic, because he just never did.
Yeah,
And when you're an electric guitarist, the electric guitar and all the amplification and pedals can sort of mask, any flubs that you have, but an acoustic guitar won't do that for you.
yeah. That's is one of the main reason why I picked this album is because they get a lot of they have a lot of effects on their music, and it's very much in your face. And yeah, when they play it acoustic, you kind of have to hear the music as it's written a little bit more.
Yeah. But Dave, being a great drummer, even though he had never probably done a gig with brushes or a soft in his life, he's doing a really good job, and it's a really it's hard to appreciate that, like when you've been playing, I don't know how long you've been playing drums and touring, but at least 5 or 8 years, and just playing as loud as a human being can play, and then all of a sudden you've got to do this gig that's going to go on TV, and you're going to have lots of people see it, and you got to play brushes all night. I would be terrified if I had never done that.
Have you ever watched it?
I had only watched the edited version, like the TV version. When I watched it on YouTube this time, I saw all the interstitial stuff that wasn't on the TV show, and that stuff was just the best.
Yeah.
It's like they're just like figuring out what song you want to do. I don't know what song. Well, we can't do those two songs together. No, that one's drop D, right? It's just like really off the cuff, even though I read that they did rehearse for this for 2 days. But I loved all that extra like in between. That's what it's like to be in a band. It's like, Kurt will say, "Okay, should I do this song by myself?" And Dave's going, "What song?" Like, don't start without telling us what song this is. Yeah, it's awesome stuff.
Yeah, it was. I also watched it on YouTube with just like going all the way through, and it just felt so casual. um, I also really enjoyed that Kurt Cobain is using an office chair. So, like in between songs, other people are talking, and he's just spinning around in a circle.
Spinning in a circle. There you go, because that's what you do. I did.
Hi, Beckett. Did you listen
Hi.
to the album or did you
Yeah, I did.
watch it?
Oh, I listened. Yeah, I did not watch.
Had you ever listened to this album before?
I didn't realize that I had, but memories came flooding back to me of sitting in the back of my crush's car in high school listening to this album. So
It's definitely one of those albums where like I also am not sure if I listened to it in its entirety before, but I definitely know these versions of a lot of these songs.
yeah, I definitely have listened to the whole thing, except there was one song I didn't recognize. So that was surprising. Just one.
There you go.
I did pull up the track listing, so
yeah.
Are either of you old enough to remember when this came out? Because I had something I wanted to share about that.
I was not old enough to remember when this came out.
Yeah.
No.
So what's interesting, well, for me about this, so this was just a couple years after I left being in the music business, and running record stores. And so Nirvana had hit, but then this happened after I left. And I looked it up, and this was when this was released, which I'm assuming means the TV show there. It was 7 months after Kurt died, so it was still less than a year. And I remember the album. Well, I looked it up. This is their second best-selling album after Nevermind. So it sold more than In Utero within the first year of being released. It was like kind of a phenomenon because it was the when Kurt died, it was kind of like when Michael Jackson died. There were people walking around like sobbing and just didn't know what to do with their lives, right? It was a big, big, big deal. And so when this came out, and I can't differentiate between the TV show and the album, but the album sold a ton, right? That it was kind of a phenomenon as opposed to a great album, right? Like, what do I mean by that? So like Stevie Wonder in the 70s, I think Intervision is a great, great album. Songs of the Key of Life is a phenomenon, right? It was just like this cultural happening. And it was almost like like the whole community got to attend a wake for Kurt, right? It was really, really a big deal, and it was everywhere. You could be forgiven that, like if I told you MTV played this every day, right? The entire thing every day. It, like if you're on MTV, it's just like I can't get away from this thing. And sometimes it was just they would play this song and that song in a sort of a video series, but this album was a big, big deal, and part of that was it was helping everybody deal with their grief of losing Kurt, right? And the bonus on top of that is I'm only now able to look at it a little dispassionately. It's a really good album. It's like probably the best thing that came out of MTV Unplugged, because at this point MTV Unplugged was really formulaic, right? Everybody showed up, everybody played their greatest hits, everybody did it acoustically, they waved and they left, right? And this is the opposite of that. In fact, I read there was some infighting between MTV and the band, that the MTV and I think also the record label, they wanted more hits. And there's really only 2 hits maybe on here of Nirvana's. There's a lot of Nirvana material, but the hits aren't there, right? Come As You Are is kind of it. All Apologies, maybe. So it really stands up because there's all this interesting stuff. Like I had forgotten about the Leadbelly cover at the end. This is my vote for the best ending of a live album ever. Their cover of that album was of that song was the best. I always thought it was the best thing on the album. I never realized it was the last thing on the album. And then there's all these obscure covers, and they do David Bowie, yeah, but they do a weird David Bowie song that everybody had forgotten about at that point. It's like, oh yeah, that was a movie, and oh yeah, that's a great song, but we had kind of all forgotten. And it's just such how do you say what's the word? Oh, it starts with a C. Curated. They did an excellent job of curating themselves, doing obscure covers. I still don't know who the band The Vaselines is, but I love that song title is just like I would play it just for that. And it's just a real quality thing. And all these decades later, it's more than a phenomenon. It was a real quality thing, and it became a phenomenon because Kurt had died and the way he died and what he meant to people. But it's like a really good live album, and I would argue the best thing that came out of MTV Unplugged. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, MTV used to be a thing where they played music videos and not where they just did reality shows. And then Unplugged was like a series, like everybody did Unplugged. Eric Clapton, The Cure did one of my favorite Unplugs because they played children's instruments that weren't in tune and insisted on doing song after song after song on children's instruments that were out of tune. But it was just super formulaic. And everybody released the albums, and they sold a ton of the albums. Eric Clapton basically resuscitated his career by doing MTV Unplugged, right? So this, I think, creatively and just in terms of its impact on the culture, is the best thing to come out of that series.
It's still going on. MTV Unplugged. It doesn't happen as regularly, but they still release like once a year. Like they do an album.
There you go.
So because I was like, no, I've definitely like heard people doing MTV Unplugged like in 2015. And so I was like, did it end? And no, it didn't. So more, it's like, it feels like an event thing, kind of like a Tiny Desk kind of deal, like, but it doesn't happen regularly. It happens like once or twice a year. They'll invite somebody to play in their studios and then record it and release it. The most recent one was actually in 2022. So
There you
It,
go.
it didn't have anything, and that was 21 Pilots.
And is it still acoustic, meaning it's not electric?
I don't know.
I would assume so with the
I
name.
am curious because BTS has a MTV Unplugged version, so I don't think that would be done acoustics, but now I'm curious. BTS being a South Korean boy band.
Well, they can still sing. It would just
Oh.
be the backing band had to be acoustic.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, boy band acoustic doesn't quite work in my head. So I
Yeah.
am curious about that one, and I will be looking it up, and I'll let you know if they're still acoustic or if it's just a studio with a name.
Yeah. And one other thing that you mentioned, Rebecca, and this was right before you came on, Beckett, like how this showed off the strengths of their songs. That's another thing that struck me is that these, like, I mean, there's this old adage that if you have a great song, you should be able to play it on an acoustic guitar or acoustic piano and it'll be great, right? And this absolutely does that. He's a great songwriter. He writes really weird melodies, and the songs are in a way, simple and obviously meant to be played at, Black Sabbath volume and stuff. But these are really good songs.
It's actually really interesting to like listen to them acoustically, and like, I don't know, even like they open with About a Girl, which this is the only version of that song that I feel like I actually like know in my head, because I went back and like listened to all their albums, and it's the only song that I know off of Bleach. And like, as I was listening to it on Bleach, I was like, I'm pretty sure I just like, when I think of this song, I think of this version of it.
Yeah. I know a lot of these songs were well overplayed on K-Rock back in the day.
Yeah.
Like literally this version.
They had
the MTV Unplugged versions.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was all over the place. You couldn't get away from it for many years.
But I feel like it is like just an arrangement off of being like a Beach Boys song.
Yeah.
Like there's something in like the way that it's done that it's just like, oh, this is like really close to like a lot of like very things that I think of as like pop.
Yeah.
Like rhythmically in the vocals.
But that was the thing, that they were really loud, and they were really punk, and they were really out of control, but they had really good songs, which meant they had really good melodies. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
And like weird, I don't know about like really advanced harmonies, but like weird chords, it was really cool stuff. And that really comes through a lot more when there's a drummer blasting behind you and you're playing through a Marshall stack and a SVT, So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, a lot of really interesting things. I also want to say, like, up front, I really like that they use their platform to promote a band that they really enjoy.
Yeah. And I read
Because
up that
my understanding is that the Meat Puppets gained popularity after this. And like, I don't know Meat Puppets like at all, but I know that they had like a huge boost in their sales after this and were relatively unheard of before it.
Yeah, they were touring together, so I gotta assume at that point that Meat Puppets were opening for them.
Yeah.
And it kind of just came out of that.
I just really appreciate that, of like, yeah, we got a huge basis. Come on.
Lake of Fire is like one of my favorite songs off this album.
I would agree with that. I also really like Lake of Fire, and I should listen to Meat Puppets because I've never listened. Like, I might know their songs here and there, but like I don't know. I wouldn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about this album other than like having listened to it in the past. Like, I didn't know these were covers. I just had always assumed they were all Nirvana songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of covers on it. And also a lot of songs that weren't singles on the albums that they were a part of.
Exactly. Which they got a lot of stick for, but it's awesome.
Yeah, they went out of their way to like promote things that like play things that they don't usually get to play, is like kind of how I feel like it is. And so it was really funny watching the video and them being like, what song are we going to play next? I like Penny Royal Tea, where it was just like they all dipped out and it was just Kurt alone. And like right before he starts playing, he's just like, maybe I'll just change the key.
Oh no, he
Which is
announces he's going to do a different key, which is, I guess, the key on the album. And then he says, and if I mess that up, I'll just make everybody here wait and we'll go back and do it again in that different key.
yeah.
Which is just like, that's just so funny. Just announcing everybody.
Yeah. I enjoyed listening to their banter through the, in between the tracks.
I love that. And having spent a fair amount of time, in bands, that's just, that's the most real part of all of this is like, and then at one point Kurt says, how the heck am I going to play All Apologies acoustic? Right? And it wasn't before All Apologies. He's just sitting there, what am I doing here? What is this? Right. So,
Yeah.
and it's like real. He's not like, it's not rehearsed. It's not anything. It's just like, that's, and you're thinking he's going to drop it from the set list. He's going to drop it from the set list. And he didn't.
Yeah, I liked after. Oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
I was just going to say, because we were talking about Penny Royalty, and he, after the song ends, I remember something that stood out to me was, I don't know, because I listened to it, I didn't watch it, so I don't know if it was Dave or Chris who said, oh, that sounded great. And he was like, shut up.
I think they also just kept getting more and more comfortable, like on the stage as it went on. Like by the time like Meat Puppets got on, they had to retune a guitar, and it was just like Kurt Cobain like making jokes about the guy trying to tune the guitar. And so yeah, there's like more and more banter as you go on throughout it.
Yeah. I love humanizing musicians. Like it's easy to forget that they are just people like us, and so I really like that part of live performance of like seeing them as more human.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've never watched an MTV Unplugged. Like, I don't think I've ever really watched one, but watching this one, I was interested in like the set design as well as like the camera motions that they were going through with it.
Oh, did you read about the set design?
I did not.
So I'm paraphrasing here. Kurt was really specific about what he wanted the set to look like, and the MTV people, this was atypical for MTV at that point. And so the guy who is the set designer, guy that Kurt's talking to, he's not getting it. And then he says to Kurt, oh, you mean you want it to look like a funeral? And then Kurt goes, yes, I want it to look like a funeral. And, all these things you can read into something, somebody did when they died, soon thereafter. But I just thought that was like, whoa. So, I mean, what a weird thing to say. And I don't look at that set thinking this looks like a funeral. I thought it looked cool. There's candles. That's neat. Right.
Yeah. There's candles and there's like lilies, and they keep like panning across like the lilies. Like there was just somebody who was like very clearly into that shot and just continually doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. For as amazing a songwriter as he was, you can really hear his depression in his music. Like it's very personal.
Yeah.
The lyrics and melodies.
Well, speaking of that, I don't know if this is what you're getting at. The last song, the Lead Belly song, one thing I do remember from when this came out is when I heard that, that was the first time it sort of dawned on me that this guy has a great voice. I just thought he was, a heavy metal screamer that wrote kind of poppy songs in a punk band. And oh my God, and it's, it kind of starts off like, oh, it's sort of in the same vibe of all the other tunes. And then when he gets, I don't know if it was a certain verse or whatever, he got to one point where he's just like really laying into that sort of that, I don't even know what to talk about, that distorted voice thing. That was absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah. I love that song for that part alone.
And then
like
the lyrics.
The music drops out and it's just Kurt, and his voice is so unique.
Yeah. And then the lyrics, you forget. It reminded me of a quote from Keith Richards about the blues. You forget like those blues guys back then, they those are scary lyrics, right? Like there was this conversation where the guys from U2 were really young. They met Keith Richards. They're all in awe of him. And Keith asked them if they ever listened to the blues. And they said, to the contrary, we object to the blues, right? And then Keith's like, whoa, what do you mean you object to the blues? And they talk about the blues bands they hear. They never want to be like that. And he's going, that's not the blues, right? When you hear the real blues, it will scare you. And that song is real blues. That voice will scare you. The words, oh my God, the words, it's just like, who is like, has a life where this would come out of their head, and oh my God.
Yeah.
But that is the album's great, but that is such an amazing performance that's sort of head and shoulders best musical moment of the whole night. And it's the closer, and it was also the closer at the shooting. And apparently there was a disagreement between MTV and Kurt saying, hey, give everybody an encore. We want you to do an encore. And he said, I can't sing anything better than what I just did. We're done. And walked away. So.
Yeah. What are you going to do? Say no to Nirvana?
Well, yeah, no, they did. All right. There was a lot
tried,
back and forth about, we want more hits, right? And stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah. I have a great appreciation for them, for their song choices, for their method of doing this, for their refusal to like play their hit songs to appease an audience. This feels like it was like Kurt coming forward and being like, oh, we're going to do an acoustic thing. Like, then I gotta really be a musician.
Yeah. And
I'm not here to appease the crowd. Also, I have no idea what like Smells Like Teen Spirit would sound like acoustic. Like,
yeah, I don't think it would work. But
I don't think it would work either.
But I think they were pretty aware of what all the tropes were that were surrounding Unplugged, and they were just kind of being punk and sort of rebelling against all of that.
That was their whole, they were very counter culture, against the grain. Like, that was their whole thing. I mean, that was punk rock in general. And, you know, they kind of invented the whole genre of grunge within that. But like I recently saw something just coincidentally about how Kurt at one of their concerts was so upset at the fans. He hated their fans. He thought their fans were douchebags. But he was so upset at them for booing off the stage an all female band that was one of their openers, and like literally like pelting all kinds of objects at them to like get them off the stage. Horrible to these poor women. And Kurt was so mad at them that he played the whole concert, like 50 or so minutes, 60 minutes, however long it was, just mumbling nothing, gibberish instead of the words to the songs in like a really bad, like, like to piss them off, because
he was getting stick from the audience in the interstitial bits. Somebody said, "Can you hurry it up?" Didn't they say? Remember?
I heard some.
But he reacted to it. He said, "Did you just say, could I hurry it up?" Right? It was just, and then the way he introduces the Lead Belly song, he was reacting to somebody in the audience. Said, "F you. Here's our last song." It's like, okay. But I think part of that was, and Dave Grohl's talked about this, and when you were saying that, Beckett, it reminded me of this. He said the big shocking thing about when they got big was they had this audience, and it was their tribe, man. It was the people they would have hung out with in high school. And then the jocks started showing up, and that to Dave was like, when they got big, he's got going, wait, these people would have kicked my ass in high school, right? It's like they're showing up at our song, at our gigs, and they're liking it, and that's just so weird. So I think that part of that was Kurt's thing. I can imagine. Sorry.
I also want to bring up how hilarious it was that Chris plays accordion.
Yeah.
I didn't see that coming, and then he like put down the bass, pick up the accordion, and I was like, "Excuse me."
Isn't that fun? Now
just out of nowhere, like.
That is kind of a trope of MTV Unplugged, because, John Mellencamp always had an accordion player on tour with him, but like somebody like Bruce Springsteen or somebody in the folk rock area, they would have the accordion player at all of the MTV Unplugged things. But that totally worked because it was so against type. Like, wait, the bass player in Nirvana knows how to play an accordion. What the hell?
Yeah.
Where's
mean,
the
And they're
banjo?
playing it,
banjo?
and they're playing it on a religious track.
Yeah, that's just so nuts.
Hell yeah. That's like the most punk rock thing.
Yeah.
So this is off topic, but it is kind of the same vibe. But people are very, very upset with the new Joker movie because,
I heard about that.
yeah, the initial Joker came out, and like the people that really, really liked it, when they came out with the second one, they're like, what's the most Joker thing we could do? Do exactly what everybody that liked the first movie is going to hate. Let's make it a musical, man. And I was like, no, that's exactly the vibe.
Yeah.
Wait, the second Joker movie is a musical?
Yeah.
Wow. Does
Yep.
it work? Have you
I
seen
would
it?
say that it's more, I have seen it. I actually enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I would say that it's more has a musical influence on it. Like it's not musical. It's like more built in.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, they
Well, in that case, I should watch it because I think I'd probably like it. Because I hate Joker fans. They are the worst.
so I thought that was pretty funny. But it is. It's like the most punk rock thing you can do.
Yeah, against the grain.
I'm having a little bit of internet troubles, so
Yeah.
I apologize if I dip out for a second.
No problem.
There are so many charts for this album that like I couldn't get everything on here, so this was the shortest year-end chart list I could find. And I think it's just unprecedented for a live album to be the number 4 European top album.
This came out. When did he die?
He died in April of 94, and this was released in November of 94.
Well,
The actual recording was done a year earlier in November of 93.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can see how this album would, resonate with people. He was such a huge star. And like Miguel was saying, like people didn't know how to deal with his death. And I don't know.
Yeah. And I will say that for the weekly charts, it's pretty much one around the world.
Yeah. That makes total sense. And I'm sure that was the case in America. But it's weird because
all around the world except for Japan. Japan has it placed at number 20.
Yeah.
But everywhere else it's either 1 or 2.
Well, Japan sucks. No.
Well, one thing this is missing is this is just the CD and the LP and the cassette. This is not the impact and how much it was on TV, on MTV, right? So if you multiply those two things together, I guarantee you in the United States, this was the biggest album that year. It's just when you just look at album sales back then, when MTV was such a huge influence, it's different. But I guarantee you nobody owned the TV and radio and music store airwaves like Nirvana did with Unplugged.
Well, and it continued. Like the impact of this album coming out in the same year that he died, like lived on into, because I remember this album specifically, like different songs from this album being played on the radio constantly when I was in middle and high school, like all the time. So I can't even imagine like what the radio sounded like that year. Like I'm sure it was everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a big deal. And again, kind of like a public wake, a big catharsis for everybody to sort of process their grief. Oh my God, there's newish stuff from Nirvana and it's interesting and it's on TV all the time and we can buy the album. Yeah.
I'm going to see what other slides. I don't have like a lot of deep discussion for this album. I just really wanted to watch it and kind of explore like Nirvana. This is the setup for it, which is covered in flowers and candles. I also wanted to like go back and just like listen to Nirvana's discography because it turns out that I have never listened to Bleach.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
it it doesn't sound like their later stuff. Like it's much more like punk rock, maybe. I don't know. It's less polished.
I can tell you why.
Please go ahead. We have the time.
Dave Grohl didn't join until Nevermind. There's a different drummer. Dave was the 5th drummer in Nirvana. And, not to speak out of turn, but like there are no great bands without great drummers. The Beatles weren't the Beatles until Ringo showed up. Led Zeppelin wasn't Led Zeppelin until Bonham showed up and Robert Plant brought him in. I don't think Nirvana's Nirvana until Dave shows up. Now, that doesn't mean Bleach isn't a great album, because it's still got Kurt writing songs and Chris, right? But it's like that's a different band on Nevermind. Totally different band.
Yeah. That drummer makes all the difference.
Yeah. And it's weird because I think of them as a 2-album band, and part of my grief for Kurt's passing is like, oh man, we needed the 3rd album, because a lot of bands, the 3rd album was when things really kick in. And it's like, well, they did have a 3rd album, but not with a real lineup. And it's nothing against that drummer. He might have been a better drummer, than Dave, but the vibe of the 3 of them was way different.
Yeah, it's a whole new vibe.
Yeah. Yep,
so, and then it was kind of just a joy to revisit Nevermind. I also haven't really ever listened to In Utero, as weird as that sounds. Like, it was also another one where I was like, man, I don't think I've really listened to this all the way through.
I don't think I have either. I've listened to obviously songs from it, but
it's a great album. But yeah, I wanted to say one thing about Nevermind. So again, I was working in record stores at that time, and I didn't have to buy it because you couldn't escape it, right? And it was sort of like the same thing when U2 had Joshua Tree. I was working in a record store at the time, and it's like I was kind of sick of it because it was everywhere. Every record store you walked into, they were playing it or just finished playing it or just about to play it. And there's that. And then my other thing was their big hit, the Smells Like Teen Spirit, is the guitar riff from a band called Boston, who had a big hit in the 70s called More Than a Feeling. And it's like they didn't even change it. And so my initial impression of them was, well, they're kind of ripping off a 70s band. How punk is that? I mean, come on, right? And so, and it was an album I never had to buy because I was hearing it constantly and just didn't appreciate them until In Utero, right? Because that was, it was less of a phenomenon than Nevermind. I'm not saying the album is not as good on its own, but it was like all the noise had quieted down and I could actually listen to them as opposed to have it sort of imposed on me. But yeah, I had a weird introduction to Nirvana.
I mean, I think I did as well, of just, you just hear it constantly. It's one of those things that, like, I don't know, I don't think there's really any band where, like, your introduction to it is to listen to an entire album, especially not anymore. But I never really listened to them. It was always just on.
Yeah.
Like, I always just knew.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's first introduction is a whole album to any band, unless you're like being introduced by someone who is like a super fan of theirs and puts it on and forces you to listen to it or something. But most people,
or somebody who forces you into a music album listening club.
But I think most people will have heard like songs here and there, and then they like them, so they go check out the group. It used to be you hear them on the radio. Now it's you hear them on social media, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
Spotify recommendations.
When I think about like musicians that I listened to in the past, like I knew a few singles and then I'd go buy the album and then listen to the album in its entirety.
Yeah.
I can remember doing that with Green Day, where I heard a few Green Day songs and I went into my dad's CD collection, because my dad's a huge Green Day fan, and listened to the albums. It never even crossed my mind that I could listen to a Nirvana album, is how much I think I've heard them and just like,
yeah, I think, it reminds me of a funny instance where my best friend growing up, like we were as close as sisters. We called each other sisters. And we both heard Natalie Imbruglia's Torn on the radio. and like we're obsessed with that song. So I went and I bought the album and I listened to the whole thing, and I was like, you got to listen to this whole album. It's so good. All of it. I love every song on it. And she was like, no, I don't need to do that. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, so what? Okay. It's just strange.
Oh, hey, a real quick nerdy thing. Nevermind was recorded in Van Nuys, and not far from where I live in Van Nuys, basically right across the 405 from the Budweiser plant. It's a studio. It's a classic studio called Sound City that is still there.
Yeah, I also live pretty close to there. And I think of that when I saw that, I was like, wait 1 second, I know where that is.
Yeah. And there's a great, Dave Grohl has a whole part of his life where he produces documentaries, and he did a documentary about Sound City called Sound City, oddly enough. But it's a great like love letter to that studio and his, how I think they play, how many days is that? The 2nd of May to 28th. So that's 26 days.
Right.
That just completely changed their life. Right. Cause they were scuffling for gigs before then. So
yeah, really famous studio.
Yeah, changed everything for them for better or worse.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like when you get that big that quick, like bands like REM. I'm reading a book/magazine about REM, and they got that big, but it took them 8 or 10 years, right? And it was gradual. And with Nirvana, it was from nothing to like the biggest thing in the world overnight. And that's, I think, really, really, I mean, it's hard enough to become everything in the world, even if you had 10 years a run before it happened. But I think that's, boy, I hate to say a contributing factor to all the strains that were happening with Kurt, but
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a lot for anyone to handle.
Would have been a lot easier if they, had a bunch of great albums for 8 or 10 years, and then all of a sudden they got huge.
That's something that like one of my old teachers always says is like, as a musician, what you should be aiming for is just a consistent career over time. You don't want to be a star. Like you don't want to shoot that high so fast. Like it is unsustainable.
Yeah, but he's not talking about music. He's just talking about the fame part of it.
Oh, no, that's what I mean.
Yeah, the fame kind of sucks.
Yeah. Is if you have like a consistent but small fan base over like a long period of time, you can support yourself pretty easily. But if you're shooting up to like being famous, like that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, wait. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, not to shift the conversation to a band that we're not. This discussion is not about. But I mean, Rebecca mentioned Green Day. I could talk about them for hours. But there's a big like Billy Joe has talked about several times about how how much he respects people like Kurt Cobain and Nirvana and things like that, and just being in the scene during that time. It was very, and 1994 was when Green Day also blew up. So,
Dookie.
Yeah. And
yeah, they kind of hit it big all of a sudden too.
They did. Yeah. And so he is very much, mentions all the time that he's so grateful that they haven't had anything like that happen. Like they're all still alive. They're all still around. Like they've been able to successfully revive their career a few times. And, so it's not like, I don't know. He just talks a lot about how he's very grateful that they didn't have something like this in there. After blowing up.
Yeah.
So
hey, looking at this picture, I wanted to call out 2 geeky things about guitars. Number one, Pat Smear's guitar. That's a Buck Owens guitar. Like Buck Owens, the country guy from Bakersfield. It doesn't get any more country than that. So how can you be more punk than playing in Nirvana and playing a Buck Owens guitar? And Kurt's got this just weird guitar. It's got 3 pickups on it. 2 of them are electric guitar pickups that are just kind of stapled to a regular Martin acoustic. It's just the weirdest guitar you could come up with for a gig like this because it's not really acoustic. And apparently he was playing through his electric rig. He used that guitar partly because he could just run it through his pedal board and the same amp that he used for his electric guitar. So, but it is just a weird guitar.
I want to talk about just the fact that, yeah, this was a live album and it is like top of the charts. But like now that I'm like thinking about the year 1994, it's also like Weezer came out in 1994. Like they're still listed as like, this is a website that's like doing the ratings based on like ratings, sales, and things like that, and it lists MTV Unplugged at number 7. And ahead of it is like Nine Inch Nails, Oasis had their album come out, Weezer, Portishead. Like it was a good year for music albums.
Big year for music, yeah.
And this is still number 7. And yeah, I do realize that a lot of that probably has to do with Kurt's death, but it's still just a really good album.
Yeah.
And that might be true that all those other albums, I mean, all those artists are great and those other albums sold a lot, but I don't remember having any album having the presence that this album had. And again, that was because of the combined, they're on MTV every hour and a half, it seemed like, and everything that was happening with the sales of the album. You weren't seeing Portishead on TV in regular rotation at all, or Weezer. They might have been there, but it wasn't as much as these guys were.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I do not have anything else to add for this. I just really appreciate your guys' willingness to take on a rather unconventional album for this, even though I think you're absolutely correct. This is probably one of the like best curated live albums. Like it was great watching it from like start to finish with like all the interludes on it. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, now I want to go watch it.
Yeah.
Do. I appreciate you choosing this one, Rebecca. It was so nostalgic for me. I'm such a 90s kid and I freaking love 90s music. And just going back and revisiting this album was like what I needed today. So
yeah. Shoot, I just had a thought. I lost my train of thought.
I'm waiting to see if you get it back because I have no more thoughts.
I just had a great thought, but you know.
My only final thought, and maybe it'll jog your memory, I don't know, but is I, not that I'm biased, but I do think that 90s music was the best music.
I have a theory about that. If it was it the decade when you were 12, 13, 14?
I mean, it has nothing to do with nostalgia, she says bitterly.
No, it's not nostalgia.
I'm kidding. It's totally nostalgia. Yeah, no, I was a kid in the 90s and I love 90s.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think most people are like that. For whatever reason, my decade was the 80s, but I was 12, 13, 14 in the 70s. Not that I didn't appreciate the 70s, but I just sort of figured everything out in the 80s. I was a late bloomer. But yeah, that's when it's like there's this weird confluence. It has to do with the baby boomer generation. And at those ages, you are aware enough to be aware of the culture and not just a kid. You have some money and you don't have a lot of place to spend it. So if you want, you can spend it on albums, And
that's exactly what I did. Yeah, I think you're right because like it's a little bit of like starting to come into your own as a person and branching off from what your parents have just done around you. Because, my parents being boomers, they listened to, 50s music, 50s, 60s music all the time. And so I think in my early teens, it was very much just, discovering what I like personally. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
And I did spend a lot of money on CDs.
Absolutely. And at least when I was, so when there was a record industry before Napster happened and then the iPod, the whole industry was driven by what 13 and 14-year-olds bought, right? So if Madonna was going to sell 5 million albums in a year, she had to be just nailing it with the 13, 14, 15-year-old crowd. Same thing for Michael Jackson. Even people like Bruce Springsteen and U2, yet you had to be selling a lot of, shifting a lot of units in that particular demographic, because that is the stuff that would sell, you know?
Mhm.
And it's what happens when you become more of a teenager and you're in high school is there's other things going on. You discover, romantic relationships. You start feeling shame
Yeah, you
about
start.
things that aren't cool. And, it sort
Yeah.
of like shuts down part of your music sort of consumption.
And also making connections between formative experiences and the music that's happening at that time. Like I was saying, how this listening to this album took me back to sitting in my crush's car listening to this album. So,
Amazing. Isn't that cool?
But yeah, so I think that has a lot to do with the feelings that come with the music that you like from formative years. But I wanted to mention, interestingly, that I think the way that I was introduced to one of my favorite bands, Green Day, is by listening to all of Dookie at once in succession.
Oh.
We were introduced to them, my brother and I, by some friends of ours, and they were like, "You got to listen to this." And they had the CD and they just put it on for us. And we're like, "This is amazing."
Yeah. I was thinking I didn't really have that kind of experience, but I did. So when I was 6th grade, 7th grade, one of my neighbors had the two Beatle greatest hits. That there's one that's red and one that's blue, right? Which is cheating because it's only the best Beatles stuff. But that was an album, even though it was curated greatest hits. But that's sort of when I started to like the Beatles, because before that I didn't like the Beatles because my only experience with them was their TV show, and the Monkees had a much better TV show. Therefore, the Beatles sucked because they were good at TV show as the Monkees. Anyway, but that was 6 or 7 year old ago. But,
I mean, yeah, at 7 years old, that is more important. So. Yeah,
we could, Rebecca, this is something we could talk about, albums that remind us of really key parts of our youth and talk about that, because for me, it's being on tour for the first time, and the people that were the DJs at the back of the bus introduced me to these two albums when I was 14. And that combination of, we're on an all-night bus ride. It's dark. Some people are sleeping. Some people are awake. I'm listening to music that's completely blowing my mind. I'd never heard anything like it in my life. And then that's just like, I don't really remember smells, but I remember everything. It was a bus ride from a gig in Stockton back to Santa Clara in the Bay Area, right? I can tell you everything about that bus ride because it's just like...
Maybe in the future I'll have guest curators, because right now it's just me kind of picking.
Well, no, what I say is that the theme could be just like albums that you heard that changed your life kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm just like, pick an album. What do you think we need to listen to? And then you tell me the story behind it. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we log off for the evening?
Did you guys already, before I jumped on, state what your favorite song was from this?
Not really. We kind
of... No question. Where did you sleep last night? The last one. The Lead Belly song, Where Did You Sleep Last Night? Absolutely.
I do love that one.
If I was... I was going to say, if somebody's never heard of Nirvana, which is like really hard to consider, it's kind of not the album you would send them to. But if you thought Nirvana was too heavy and just too, check this out, because this is good music. I could see country fans liking it. I mean, somebody who just as a blues lover thought Nirvana was stupid. Listen to Where Did You Sleep Last Night? You tell me that's stupid, and we'll have words in the parking lot afterwards.
Yeah, I think mine's probably Lake of Fire. I do like Where'd You Sleep Last Night too. I like this whole album. I love every song on it, except the one that I didn't recognize, which I don't remember which one that was.
Mine is actually about a girl, mostly because it has like a little bit of a nostalgia feel to it. And Also, I think I am not super big into grunge. And like I said, it kind of has this vibe to it that you change the arrangement slightly and it feels like it's going into a different genre.
Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
poppy thing.
Yeah. So, and I really like the way that the lines lead into one another.
It's the perfect song to lead off an album like this,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not, you don't have to like recalibrate, because nobody knew this song, by the way. This is not the first album. Nobody knew the first album, right? And so you not have to recalibrate. Wait, they're doing "Come as You Are," but that's not "Come as You Are," right? And it's like the complete gateway drug. And I hope, with the, I hope it was the first song they played at the session, because that, to me, that's just how this album starts, and how it ends is non-negotiable. It has to start with "About a Girl." It has to end with "Where Did You Sleep Last Night?"
I am
Perfect beginning
95%
and ending.
sure that it did start with About a Girl because I remember his little intro for it is we're going to start with a song but from our first album that you've never heard of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Perfect lead-in song. Just a perfect way to start an album like this.
On that note, I am going to end the call for the evening. So I would like to thank you both for joining me and for listening to things with me. And I hope to catch you on the next one.
Bye, everybody.